Hello fellow cyborgs, I am here to do one big long video of all the things that I haven't told you about yet. I'm not going to do a December wrap up because this video is more important and I only have time to make this video right now, so I'm going to talk about all of the books that I read in 2017. I'm going to talk about how much money I spent on those books, how many books I hauled in 2017. I'm also going to talk about my 2018 Book-olutions briefly, and then finally I'll get to my favorite novels that I've read in 2017 that were not rereads. Okay, so I'm going to shout a lot of numbers at you, so I'm going to also superimpose them on the screen at some point when I'm editing. Have fun, future Amanda. So I hope that you enjoy all of these numbers. In 2017, I managed to read 89 books, and 7 of those were DNFs. I did not complete my Goodreads reading challenge of 100 books in a year, and that's okay. I decided to be empowered and not let a arbitrary reading challenge online make me feel bad. So I decided to just fail, I guess, to just own up to the fact that I didn't reach my goal, which was 100, and not change that goal so that I could have completed a challenge just for the sake of doing so. In 2018, I have set that goal to 100 books as well because I want to be reading 100 books a year. I think 89 was too few. That made me sad. So let's break down star ratings here. So in the year of 2017, I read 4 one-star books, 12 2-star books, 46 3-star books, 15 4-star books, and 12 5-star books. Now, one of the cool things that I managed to do this year was reread 12 different books. And I know I've talked on this channel before on how rereading is so important and why don't I do it anymore. So it's cool that I managed to reread 12 books, but those 12 rereads ended up in my 4 and 5-star books. So out of the 27 4 and 5-star books of the year, 12 of them were things that I was revisiting. So I personally think that 15 4 and 5-star books in a year is too few. I'm really disappointed at the amount of 3-star books that I read. Some 2s and 1s, I feel like those you can't really help, but for me, having a lot of 3-star books means that my reading was mediocre at best. I don't think I often read solid 3 stars. Most of the time, these are books that disappointed me, but they weren't bad, so I couldn't rate them lower. So having a year that was more than halfway full of letdowns is, So I don't think my reading year was so hot. However, I do have 5 books that I'm going to talk to you about later that did definitely make my reading year a fair bit more enjoyable. Now let's talk about the books that I hauled. First, let's talk about my physical TBR and my 0 by 2018 challenge, which did not happen at all. I started out 2017 with something like 120 books on my physical TBR shelf. I now have 104 books on my physical TBR shelf, I believe. And how does that happen? That happens when you haul close to 70 books and you read close to 90 books. You get a net down number of about 20. So the good news is that I only hauled 68 books. Now, in comparison, let's look at last year. Let's look at some of my stats for last year. So in 2016, I believe I read 192 books, okay? I also hauled 191. So I netted 1 book that year, but my TBR was bigger, and I was doing a lot more reading. I also spent a lot more money on those 191 books. It was over $1,000 to my recollection. Now this year I acquired 68 books. Those were the ones that I personally hauled, whether or not I did them in videos, because I've been absent on this channel for quite a bit of this year. I purchased only 28 of those 68. Now that's something I'm pretty darn proud of. With the 0 by 18 challenge, not only was this a challenge to read the books on my physical TBR, I mean, obviously the heart of the challenge is to have 0 physical TBR books by the year that you say that you're going to do it by, but it's also, you can't then be hauling a lot of things if you're trying to cut down on those numbers unless you have an incredibly moderate TBR, physical TBR already, and you can haul and read all of those and read all of your new acquisitions, and it's a hunky-dunky situation. So one thing that I am proud of is the fact that I only bought for myself 28 books throughout the year. Now, 40 of those books were lovely gifts from friends and family for birthdays, extra occasions, and of course, Christmas, but I personally only bought 28 books. I only spent $274 on those 28 books, so going from spending $1,000 on books to spending under $300 is a huge step down in the book acquisition department. So on average, for those 28 books, I paid $9.79, so less than $10 per book. I'm a happy camper. Now let's talk about the books that I hauled versus the books that I read. So as I said, I personally purchased 28 books in 2017. I also read 28 books that I did haul in 2017. It was not the exact 28, but you get the gist. Before the Christmas holiday, I haven't had a chance to, start chipping away at those books yet. I had read over half of the books that I had hauled that year. That's pretty darn good. That's not normally my track record. I read 23 books that I purchased in 2016. I read 4 books that I purchased in 2015 and 11 that I'd purchased sometime before 2015. Speaking of what else I read, I think I already mentioned that I reread 12 books, which obviously rereading is not going to help bump my physical TBR down, but that's okay. Rereading has its own values. I also read 16 books on audiobook, which means these were potentially books that I borrowed from the library, from Overdrive or Hoopla, or audiobooks that I had of physical books. But I did rely on audiobooks quite a bit this year, which was really helpful. 7 books I borrowed. So those 7 books and the reread, so we had about 20 books that I read this year that didn't really count toward chipping away at my TBR. So in essence, what I'm saying is that I completely and utterly failed at the 0 by 2018 challenge. And I am disappointed because I did not have the energy to prioritize reading at points in this year, and that's something that disappoints me. I really do want to be reading 100 books a year at least. That's a number that I really like, that I'm really comfortable with, because I really don't want to have a repeat year where I read 46 3-star books and another couple handfuls of 2- and 1-star books, and they were 2/3 of the books that I read in a year. That just is not a number ratio scenario that pleases me. So those are all of the numbers that I wanted to talk with you about. I hope you gained something from them. I mean, they used up an hour of my time getting all of those stats together, so that was good, time well spent. Let's talk about my 2018 Book-olutions. So I am continuing on with the 0 TBR challenge with the 0 by 19. Do I think this is going to happen? I think it's incredibly possible, but I'm realistically holding reservations considering how few books relatively I read in 2017. I read 89 books, and right now I have like 104 on my TBR. I will be acquiring more books, if only from gifts from people. Lovely gifts that I can't control, but that I love getting. So at this point, if I read another 89 books in 2018, then I will not have a 0 TBR. However, if at the end of 2018 I have a physical TBR of less than 20 books, I will be pleased. Moving forward, as far as this channel goes, I think that I am going to cut myself some slack and stop trying to be an honors kid and have a more loosey-goosey schedule as to when I'm going to be here. I'm finding that my job, though part-time, is pretty socially exhaustive. I use a lot of my social energy when I'm at work, and so being social to a camera and having my happy face on for you guys is just something I can't do a lot of the days. So moving forward, I'm hoping on just doing occasional, I don't know how often, check-ins on updating you on the 0 by 19 challenge. So talking about some recent awesome reads or some recent duds, what I'm currently reading, how many books are currently on my physical TBR, what did I recently add to my TBR. They're going to kind of be loose pajama Sunday essay sort of things, but just catching you up with what's been going on in my reading life. Not only am I disappointed that I wasn't more successful in the 0 by 18 challenge, because I do want to have a really low physical TBR. I want to be able to buy 5 books that I'm currently interested and read them right now and not feel like I need to prioritize older reads. But I also am really disappointed that I didn't allow for my channel to have a cathartic, successful watching experience for you guys seeing me power through my TBR. I can't tell you how much satisfaction I got watching Sophie from Portal and the Pages complete the 0 by 16 challenge. It was just so cool counting down the books with her and seeing that she set herself a goal and she followed through, and you could plot her journey, and I just became like unhealthily invested in the number of physical TBR books she had. And that's really the experience that I wanted for you guys, and I wasn't able to follow through with that. And so that really bums me out, because I thought that that would be something fun for me and fun for you, and I failed. But it's not the worst thing to fail at, and it's not the end of the world, and you guys are still sticking around for some reason. I don't know, you're like, okay, thank you for being here. There you go. We're going to have a loosey-goosey 2018. I'm going to work my darndest on hauling maybe even less than 28 books, maybe even purchasing less than 28 books myself, and reading a lot more. Hopefully I can get to that 100 book goal, because I would feel like I'd used my spare time a lot more rewardingly if that were the case. So we'll just have to see what happens. I think I am probably going to be a little bit more merciless as far as DNFing and unhauling books that I didn't even read. Speaking of, I didn't talk to you about that. Let me just go through a few more stats. So I did unhaul 10 books from my TBR shelf that I didn't even read. I just lost interest in. I unhauled 1 book that I was gifted in 2017. Don't judge me. I unhauled 7 that I had purchased in 2016 and 2 that I had purchased in 2015. So, you know, unhauling books and not reading them is also a way to cut down on the physical TBR. So that's something that I'm going to continue to do. I'm going to continue when I look at a book and it just makes me feel guilty to say goodbye. And if I'm reading a book and at any point I'm just like, don't cur, just DNF it. You know, those 7 DNFs, I'm really glad I didn't force myself to read them, and I added 7 more 1 or 2 star books onto my read thing. Well, I counted them. They were part of the 2 and 1 star things. But anyway, I'm actually going to stop blathering at you and show you some books that I loved this year. Love is a weird word. So I have a couple 4-star reads in this pile that were just really impactful for me. And frankly, I think that some books can be really good, but I can remember them better than some 5-star books. Does that make sense? I mean, like I said, more than half of the 5-star books I read this year were rereads. So, you know, I'm not going to talk your ear off about Skullduggery Pleasant. I'm not going to talk to you about East of Eden. I'm not going to talk to you about Jane Eyre. I'm going to talk to you about books that I've probably talked to you about before, but they were ones that I discovered in 2017. So let's talk about those 2 4 stars that I mentioned. These are 2 books that received 4 stars from me. Like I said, I didn't love them. I really liked them though, and they've definitely stuck with me. I wonder upon rereading if they will get a higher star rating. If not, 4-star books are still really, really lovely books. The first one I want to talk to you about is The Lightkeepers by Abby Genai. This comes highly recommended from Acacia Ives, and I hauled this for Easter. I was given this by the Easter Bunny, and I read it, and it was really lovely. Apart from the sexual assault, this is a lovely book about nature scientists, about biologists and conservationists that are studying animals. I felt like I was learning about animals and learning about the academic life when you're like on location gathering information for your studies and whatnot. Like I mentioned, there is sexual assault in here. So this also talks about things like the psychology of like an asshole rapist, also dissociation, memory, manipulations and recreations. It also talks about just people, recovery, trauma, but not overwhelmingly so. I feel like my stomach has grown tougher, but I've got a pretty weak stomach for sexual assault, and I would reread this without hesitation. I mean, it's not joyful, but it's important. And not only is it important, it's beautifully written, a fast read, even if it's not an easy read. And I was just so incredibly impressed with this, which is why I'm talking to you about it now. I do want to eventually read more by Abby G. Nye. Someday. Soon. If you haven't picked this up, I really highly recommend that you really look into it, because there is a lot to be found in here that is impressive and enjoyable, even when it's off-putting. Speaking of enjoyable even when it's off-putting, we have The Clay Girl by Heather Tucker. This is another Acacia Recommends, where she just told me that I needed to read this, and you know what? She was right, and I need to listen to her more often. So I gave The Clay Girl 4 out of 5 stars, and I remember my review talking about how there was this overwhelming sense of dread, what was going to happen to Ari in this book. And that anticipation, that dread that I felt, that was never fulfilled, kind of poisoned the reading experience enough to where I didn't love the reading experience. But I think when I reread this, I will love it, because I know that I don't have to be as protective of Ari. I don't have to be waiting for an awful, sexual assault scene or anything like that, that it's going to be okay. The magicalness of this book is how it's written. It's from the perspective of Ari, who's a young girl with a completely messed up and unconventional family, who she counts as family and who treats her as family, in Canada in the 1960s. And it's about her just navigating through all of the BS that comes with not nice people being a part of your life, either through blood or marriage, and having to deal with that. And the way that Ari deals with it is she uses her imagination in a protective way. She has an imaginary friend named Jasper, who's a seahorse, hence the cover. And she also, the language she uses to describe her world is just so incredibly whimsical. It's oversaturated whimsy, but I think it worked really well. And it was something that I found really enjoyable, because it showed how her perspective on things were literally different. That the way she talked to herself, her inner voice that we all have, we talk to ourselves in our brains, was literally very different from mine. So she literally experienced the world in a very different way, in a much more whimsical way than I did. This was so incredibly enjoyable. Also talks about hard-hitting subjects like family abuse and child sexual abuse, but again, it was in a way that I could stomach it, and a way that was respectful, and a way that was important. So again, please pick this up if this at all sounds like your cup of tea. If you're interested in unique, beautiful lyrical writing styles and reading about the 60s and corruption in Canada and stuff, then this is a book for you. Now on to the 5-star books. The first 5-star novel that I read in 2017 was Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. And this book is this family story that sweeps through generations, that is magically realistic. It's magical realism, wonderfully written, and this book opened the door to Toni Morrison for me. That is just so exciting to have open, because I know now that I have a backlog of books that I need to read from her that I will enjoy at least a 4-star level more often than not. This was weird and disturbing, but not too much so. It talks about how weird family can be, and how our memories can be warped by experiences that we have now, and it just was a whole lot of something I wasn't really expecting, and it was so refreshing and so odd and magical and impactful that I am just so incredibly pleased that I picked this up at a library book sale, even though I wasn't supposed to be buying books in January. It was the best $1 that I've spent in quite a while. So if you're interested in Toni Morrison, if you've read some of her other more popular works like The Bluest Eye or Beloved, please don't forget Song of Solomon. I loved it, and I think you will too. Now I want to talk to you about these books are really connected, these two books, but I'm going to talk to you about book number 2. But book number 2 of the year for me was I think it was a more enjoyable reading experience than book number one because of who I read it with and how we read it together. But book number one was significant because it opened the floodgates for a new and really important enjoyment that I found in the latter half of 2017. You guys probably know what I'm talking about if you were watching my channel in September, October, but in any case, I'm going to stop being what does this mean? Ambiguous, and just actually show you some books. Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell was my favorite reading experience of the year, and it was also one of the favorite reading experiences of the buddy I read this with, who is Sarai from Sarai Talks Books. We buddy read this together in September, August. I'm a bad book mom. I don't remember when this came into my life. And it was so incredibly enjoyable to dive into the characters, give nicknames for some of them, and just talk about the ins and outs of this really quiet and, frankly, fairly unimpressive, fairly not sensational Victorian novel. This is all about Molly Gibson and her growing up and the people in her neighborhood and how her life intersects with a very well-to-do family and what happens when her father remarries and all of the little twists and turns in a relatively small community. It's a quiet story and it's a small story, but it is psychologically deep. Sarai and I talked for hours about these characters and the things that happened and the implications of the things that happened. There's just so much that you can pick apart in Wives and Daughters. And this is a book that's not finished. Like, it ends abruptly. And you would think that that would completely and utterly ruin a book. Why would you want to read a book that you can't finish? You know, but the way that Gaskell wrote this, the way that when we leave it off, all of the shoelaces are folded up perfectly, and the only thing she needed to do was pull the strings tight. You knew what was coming. You could fill in the gaps. And frankly, I thought it was a little bit more fun for me that I got to create the ending in my own head, because in book number one, I feel like the ending was satisfying, but I would have preferred it to be prolonged. So having the ending cut off, unfortunately, too soon, made it so that Gaskell couldn't disappoint me with a too abrupt ending. Well, I mean, I guess, like, this is a super abrupt ending, but I think you guys know where I'm getting at. Don't be afraid to pick this up because it's unfinished. It's not going to matter. It's not going to matter. By the time you get to the final words, you will have decided of whether you've loved this or not. You're not going to need those last pages to decide what sort of rating you're going to give this book. So I think that's all I want to talk about Wives and Daughters. It was such an incredibly pleasant reading experience. It was by far the book that I looked forward to picking up day after day, the most throughout the entire year, which is saying a lot. 89 books is a lot, but you know, a lot of them were disappointing, and a lot of them I wasn't looking forward necessarily to get home and pick it up. So thank you, Miss Sarai, and I look forward to many, many more wonderful buddy reads with you in the future. North and South is my favorite book of 2017, much deserved favorite book. And this is my favorite book because well, technically it was Wuthering Heights, but we're not talking about rereads in this best books list. But Wuthering Heights was a classic that I reread this year and fell in really strong like with, and it really got me into a kick of reading Victorian novels. North and South was one of those novels that I picked up. We actually, Sarai and I buddy read this, but it just wasn't as much of a fun buddy read as Wives and Daughters. And we picked it up because I was in a classics kick because of Wuthering Heights. And North and South was by far the most rewarding new book experience of 2017 because it just solidified my rediscovery of my enjoyment of Victorian novels. I'm sure you guys have heard what North and South is about and the dreamy Mr. Thornton. It's about this young woman named Margaret who moves from a small country town into the industrial town of Milton, which is an analog for Manchester, and it's about the difference in her attitude coming from the South with the attitude of those in the North. It's about finding out who you are when you change locations and your circumstances change. It's about grief and family. It's about finding love and forgiveness. It's about poor versus rich folk. It's about social change. It's about all sorts of things. And yet it still seems almost as quiet of a story as Wives and Daughters. And I think part of that is because there are relatively few characters in North and South, especially compared to some of the sweeping Dickens that have dozens of characters. We pretty much just have the Thorntons, the Hales, the Higgins family, and then a couple other like tangential people here and there. That's pretty much the extent of the characters here. And now that I come to think of it, that's quite a lot of characters. It just doesn't feel like it though. It just feels really, really intimate is what North and South feels like. And like I vaguely mentioned before, the ending of North and South was satisfying, but were I writing North and South, which of course I wouldn't be, I would have kind of given me an extra chapter to just kind of, come down from the high of the climax and, just revel in the happily ever after, or yeah, that's good. The happily until we die, whatever. You guys understand what I'm trying to say. North and South also, thank you very much, because it introduced me to the wonder of Elizabeth Gaskell. I read 5 works by Elizabeth Gaskell in 2017, though one of them I DNF'd, unfortunately. It was The Life of Charlotte Bronte, which was a nonfiction by Gaskell. It just wasn't Gaskell-y enough for me. So North and South opened up that floodgate too. It solidified the fact that I need to read more Victorian novels, and that Elizabeth Gaskell is one of the best authors ever, and that I need to read everything that she's written, pretty much. So those are some lovely, lovely things that North and South has, done for me. So thank you, North and South. I appreciate you ever so much. And I hope that if you're thinking about trying a Victorian novel that you haven't picked up before, North and South is one of the ones that you put on your list to consider. Wow, this has been a long video. I hope that I've managed to edit it down so that I am as succinct as possible while still retaining my goobery personality. Please let me know in the comments down below your top read of 2017. I've been so enjoying seeing everybody's videos. For those of you who are fellow booktubers, it's just lovely to hear you talk about the books that you love and the books that changed you. Wish me luck for 0 by 19, because I'm going to need it. I'm going to need to have a lot of discipline to just not watch the TV shows with the mumsy, even though it's fun and easy, because reading is more enjoyable. And for those of you who've been asking yourself this question the entire video, yes, I did cut my hair. Yes, I did donate it to Locks of Love. So there you go. I hope you have a fabulous 2018. New year, new start to the new year, and I hope that you've already picked up a book that you're going to love. Until next time, continue to be lovely.